Hey again! Since last time on Playing Goddess, we covered things like natural disasters, which are born from the planet itself, or at least the geologically formed ones. This time, we're going to look at those major events which stem from beyond the planet itself. A major world-changing event that can happen, for example, is a meteor impact. We kind of vaguely touched on that a while ago. Let's look at it a bit more in depth here. When a solar system is first forming, there's a lot of excess debris just floating around. Rocks, comets, mini-moons, all sorts of stuff. More than that, planets haven't developed thick atmospheres yet. That takes time for them to cool off and settle down enough for the gases to build up naturally. And it takes like 1 billion years or so on average. Yeah, astrological timescales are crazy, I know. Anyway, early on in the planet's history, it's gonna be pummeled with meteors and comets on a regular basis because A, there's a lot more of them. B, they're all scattered all over the place rather than kept in moderately neat and tidy asteroid belts and such. And C, the atmospheres of planets aren't thick enough to cause them to burn up on entry yet. So you get a lot of these impacts happening. Later on in the planet's life, things tend to slow down a lot. The planets have already gone about their orbit and rammed into anything that was in the way, so there's not really any rocks left in the way of their orbital path anymore. There's less space debris in general, and what there is generally small enough to burn up on entry into a thick atmosphere, so no biggie. Usually. Sometimes you get comets and meteors which have really long orbital periods, and they take centuries to make an orbit, and as such, they haven't been cleared out fully. And sometimes they just finally catch up with just the right orbital timing to run face first into a planet. Now, most of the time, a meteor won't be big enough to really matter that much. It might flatten a few trees or make a big splash when it hits an ocean, but overall, no big deal. Then we get the world changers. Something so massive that it's like one of those supervolcanoes we mentioned last time. It kicks up so much dust into the atmosphere that first you get global warming taking place as all the heat is trapped inside, and then it's so thick that it prevents the heat from the sun getting in and it turns cold, freezing everything. The impact itself isn't the most important part usually. It's what it does to the atmosphere at this scale. You can see this if you dig up the ground. It's set in layers, and when there's a huge meteor impact like this, you tend to get a layer of dust and dirt, which clearly doesn't belong to the area, typically along with a whole bunch of fossils where there was a mass extinction level event. When the temperature changes drastically, species which aren't suited to that new environment, which have adapted to the one they're on in a specialized level, tend to die off. The generalists who are broad in their role and able to handle a variety of environments tend to live on for quite a while instead. In fact, they tend to thrive because all the specialists are dead because they're not suited to this new environment. Comets are particularly world-changing because they bring with them a ton of water. Sure, it's ice, but after a few million years, that won't matter what temperature it arrived at. The important part there is that boom, water, and lots of it. There are other major events as well. Some important, but not so obvious. Ice ages tend to be caused on Terra by a number of factors. but in particular, the orbit of Sol itself and Terra. Yes, our sun actually does have an orbit, and it also goes through varying cycles of solar maximums and minimums on top of that, though those are a much shorter duration and won't create huge changes normally. The point here is that over tens of thousands of years, the output of a star does not remain 100% consistent and stable, nor does it remain equally close to the planets which orbit it. In addition to such, things like the magnetic fields of planets and stars can also go through pretty small changes in terms of the star or planet, but that can make a much, much bigger cascading effect as well. Like, the difference between an ice age and an interglacial period on Terra is only about 5 degrees Celsius, or 9 degrees Fahrenheit. Like, it's not a big difference on a global scale, but it has a huge ramifications because you see progressively larger effects. Like, consider a small series of ships that all land on top of each other at the same time. Let's say Sol has a solar maximum, which happens on an 11-year cycle. Terra's orbit has a slight wobble to it, so over thousands of years, the angle at which it leans is towards Sol alters very slightly, not maintaining that 23.5 degree angle we enjoy right now. During the parapsis of the orbit, we're slightly closer to Sol than normal because it's an elliptical orbit, not fully round. So that can also mean a bit more heat. Toss in something like a magnetic field flip, which prevents some of the additional forms of radiation and heat from Sol applying, and, well, add all these things and several others together all at once, and what you find is that the temperature raises up maybe 3 or 4 degrees globally for a single summer. The thing is, even a relatively small increase like this causes huge issues. Ice reflects heat much, much better than water, for example. Thus, big ice sheets at the poles now start to melt just a bit. It was only for one summer, but that's enough to kick things into motion sometimes. And when you're talking global scales like this, once something big starts, it's awfully hard to stop. Sort of a momentum thing going on. The water pools up, soaks up more heat than it would otherwise, and that makes it hotter, so more water, more heat absorbed, and it becomes a self-reinforcing effect. Soon, you have huge sections of the polar ice caps coming apart, and they float downward along the ocean currents. And what happens when you add a bunch of ice to a heat redistribution system like you have between the east coast of North America and the west coast of Europe? Well, it stops. That heat goes into the ice, melting it, but then that means instead of floating past, it lowers the temperature of that cyclic system, and everything grinds to a halt. Heat no longer transfers through the ocean currents properly, and it goes from being too hot to suddenly too cold. Right before an ice age, you get a tiny spike of heat, and then everything shuts down, and it freezes in little more than 2 to 3 years. All it takes is a bunch of small events to all take place at the same time. Now, sometimes it's not a series of small events, but a single very large event, such as a gamma ray burst. This may sound scary, but it wouldn't be an immediate problem for most life-supporting worlds, since the atmosphere and electromagnetic field which would probably be present, such as on Terra itself, would do a pretty good job of soaking up the gamma rays. Yeah, there'd be some increased ultraviolet rays for a few seconds tops, but no more than enough for maybe a sunburn. The bigger problems would come later, because that kind of effect would trigger chemical reactions between the abundance of nitrogen in an atmosphere, such as our own, and most likely other planets as well, given the frequency of nitrogen in the universe. So, what does that mean? Not good stuff, I'm afraid. It converts some of the ozone layer gradually over to nitrogen dioxide instead, which further erodes the ozone. You'd get a lovely photochemical smog to go with such, and of course, nitric acid rain. Yay! Fun stuff! Oh yeah, that's bad for our life. Oops. Well, on the plus side, life wouldn't die out entirely. At least probably not, anyway. But we'd see a lot of similarities to what happened with our supervolcanic eruptions and large meteor impacts. And that, well, the specialized creatures and plants would probably die off. Especially those like freshwater fish, which tend to be really picky about the acidity level of the water. Ecosystems would undergo upheaval. You'd find a lot of generalist creatures, which had their niches filled before by specialists, now open and ripe for thriving due to a lack of competition. This would lead to the natural evolutionary process of those same creatures then specializing to fit into their new niches more effectively, and you'd get a species explosion kinda shortly after. As in, actually, shortly thereafter. Like, probably within a few generations, you'd start seeing some pretty significant changes due to the huge change in environment. So yeah, most changes you'll see on a planet will either be large and immediate, small and gradual, or small which cascades into a large effect over time via self-reinforcement. I'm not going to go over every specific kind of disaster that can happen because, well, it's not really relevant. What matters is the overarching concepts here of planetary change because of effects which came from space. If you need to know about a specific kind, do some research and figure it out on your own. There's a near infinite expanse of stuff here. I can't cover all of it in videos as much as I'd really enjoy to. So, learn to learn, and you'll do fine. Anyway, that means it's time for homework. Yay, homework! Alright, maybe not yay, but still. For your world, come up with one large-scale extraterrestrial event and have it happen in the relatively recent past, within the past million years or so. It could happen at the start of your storyline and plays a major role in what happens in the immediate aftermath, or it could be something which happened thousands of years ago and just altered the species you'd see present, such as our most recent ice age. The point here is to have an idea of a big event that led to some major changes to give you ideas for new stuff you probably wouldn't have thought about otherwise. So yeah, that's about it for playing Goddess this month. Next time, we're going to be starting to dig into the evolutionary process, and that's gonna take a while. So expect to be learning about evolution for the next few Playing Goddess videos, so that you have a working knowledge of it so you can apply it to your own world and the life therein. Anyway, with that, I'm out. I'll see you next time!